like to present our first speaker for this morning. Tobias Wildi is currently teaching at the Institute of Information Science at the University of Applied Science in Graubünden. And he studied history and computer science at the University of Zurich. For his doctorate, he worked in a research project at the DHCH on the history of nuclear technology in Switzerland. And he completed postgraduate studies in archival and information science in Lausanne. In 2003, he founded the DocuTeam AG, a very successful archive service and information management company. And Tobias Wildi is member of the experts group on archival description of the International Council on Archives and president of the Swiss Federal Commission for the Protection of Cultural Property. His research interests include data and metadata models for archiving, the application of semantic technologies in memory institutions, and the long-term usability preservation of digital cultural assets. He is interested in the contribution archives make to the functioning of civil society, political systems, and the economy, and in the role they play in digital transformation processes. In his talk, he will apply the new ontology records in context, RICO, to contextualize Nefflen's vacation images from different perspectives, both in terms of content, geography, but also in terms of publication. Using example images, he will show how a photographer's legacy can be described and accessed in new ways. So thank you very much to have this presentation.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Good morning. Could you please change the picture to the presentation? Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation for this talk. It's a real pleasure to talk to real human beings. I haven't done that for 15 months now, and I'm really enjoying to stand up and give a talk. It's a much better feeling than just to sit in front of the screen talking with small icons via Zoom. You all know that. And I will talk to you as a member of the expert groups on archival description from the International Council on Archive, and I will present you, give you an introduction in this new ontology called Records in Context, where we currently have a version 0.2 and the version 0.1, where we have currently a version 0.2, and the version 1.0 should be published probably at the end of the year. I want to show you some example pictures from a completely unknown photographer called Werner Nefflen. He's a Swiss photographer, lived from 1919 to 2014. He attended the first photography class at the School of Applied Arts in Switzerland, Kunstgewerbeschule at Zurich. There are known photographers who attended the same class as him, but he worked his whole life as a freelance photographer. He took pictures of industry products. He worked for documenting arts from his friends, and he was never rich, he was never famous, but he left a very beautiful legacy of about 20,000 pictures, which at the end of his life he gave to a museum in Switzerland at the city of Baden. And I worked with this body of pictures for quite a long time, helped to describe them, put them in new boxes and so on, and also helped to digitize this form. I like these pictures very much. That's not a landscape picture, as you could imagine. the two boys are standing above the river of the Aare, and at the left you see a fabrication plant for a cement fabrication, and this was a very dirty plant, and they had a lot of smoke and a lot of dust coming out, and the aspect or the focus of this assignment was that Nefflen had to take a picture, a very nature picture, to show that this plant is not that dirty as you could imagine. Very beautiful, this diagonal structure, these two boys who are there. That's another picture from a local industry who was producing lamp shields and for street lamps, for private lamps, and in private households and so on. And you see this scenery with the two workers there. She's holding this lamp shield. He always tried to put human beings into this very industrial pictures which he took. And then he went off on vacation from time to time. He had a family, he had two children, and they didn't have a lot of money. He never had a car. He had a moped, and his tripods and all the boxes with the cameras were around him. And then he drove through town with on his moped. And on vacation, the family went hiking into the Swiss Alps. And he was fascinated by the farmers. There are so many pictures in his body of work about farming work. Never paid him for that, but he got up early and took pictures of farmers mowing grass, for example, or taking in the crop, or there are dozens of pictures of farming work. And so I tried to contextualize this picture during my talk. It has been taken above the Werner See in Switzerland, but I come to that later. Here we see the same farmer mowing the grass on a very steep meadow, which is something completely common until today in the Swiss Alps. That there are regions, there are meadows that are too steep to mow with machinery, so you have to get out and mow by hand. And then the family Nefflen, they had that was his other hobby beside hiking and taking vacation. He had a small vineyard. He produced about between 500 and 1,000 bottles of Pinot Noir per year. And in his garden, or where he grew up, Werner Nefflen, in his garden, his father planted 50 different sorts of grapes. So a whole biological experiment which the family did there. They had every imaginable grape. And I come back to the aspect of gardening a bit later. Now that's my use case, this body of work of a photographer. I come from an archive point of view. I'm not from a museum. I'm not from a library. The archival world is a bit different. You see why. And I just want to give you a short introduction into metadata standard, descriptive metadata in archives. I concentrate my talk on descriptive metadata. I don't go into all the technical metadata that you need to describe digital assets over the long term. Descriptive is already enough for this morning. Now, how to describe and contextualize not only photos, but also documents, written documents, text documents, videos, and so on in archives. We currently have 3 standards. The main standard is called Istituto, International Standard on Archival Description. I don't know if anybody has ever heard of that standard. It's a standardization document of, I don't know, 40 or 50 pages. It's 26 fields that you fill out. It's a title, it's a date, and so on. And everybody over the whole world uses this standard nowadays, every archive. I was in the city archive of Beijing and Shanghai about 8 years ago, and I was astonished. If you look at the interface, I didn't understand anything because everything was written in Chinese. But the fields are the same and the structure is the same. It works in a hierarchy. So this is a global concept for archivists. And if you meet an archivist somewhere in the world, you always have something in common, and that's these standards. So ISRG describes the content of the archival material. ISRCPF describes corporate bodies or describes agents, who is doing something, who is the photographer, who is the organization who produces archival material. CPF stands for corporate bodies, persons, and families. And then we have a third standard called ISDF, International Standard for Describing Functions. This standard is made to describe business processes. Remember, archives are often public archives, and they describe what a certain administration does. That means, for example, I'm a human resource department at a university, and I have certain procedures and processes to follow. If you apply for a job at a university, you write an application letter, you send a CV, a motivation letter, and so on. Then there's an interview, there's a decision, you get a contract, and all these records over time, they get stored together and following this business process. So that's the main way how we describe records and their context, try to contextualize things in archive. Now, the problem with this ISRG is it models a hierarchy, but it models exactly one hierarchy. So you can call it a mono-hierarchical model of description. And this looks like that. That's the archive database where these pictures from Werner Nefflen are currently described at the city archive of Baden, of this small town. On the left, you have the hierarchy, which starts at the top point, Stadtarchiv Baden, that's the archive, and then you go down, Bild, Foto und Filmbestände, that's the Fonds, der Bestand, and then you go deeper down, much more into the details, until you land finally down at the single object, which has some descriptive metadata on the right. So this hierarchy is very important to archives. Through this hierarchy, we describe the context of the provenance of the material we have in archives. And this makes us different from libraries, for example, or from museums. Now, why shouldn't we go on like that in archives? Obviously, it works. I could describe this photo in an archival database, no problem. Yes, there are some problems. They're very practical problems, and these standards don't fall down from heaven. I will repeat this sentence again and again. Standards are man or woman made. They are negotiated in committees, and they are developed over time. So the three standards, ISRG, ISRCPF, ISDF, they were not created as one in one work or in one time, but they were developed over a longer time, from 2003 to about 2013, over a period of 10 years. They were not really made to fit with each other. If you go into the details, there are a lot of lacking things. It's not really described in the standards how you would link. I mean, if I go back, that's a very beautiful picture. Everything is linked with each other. No, it is not. That's just a picture how the International Council and Archive would like to have it. It's not at all linked. And then there's a very practical problem. Beside ISRG to describe the content, the other standards have never really been taken up by the archives and by the software vendors. For ISDF, there is no software application available today that you just can buy as a standard product. Either CPF, yes, it's more or less implemented in the software, but more or less ISG is implemented normally. So this poses problems. We even don't have don't have software, and then the standards are not really exact. They leave a lot of room for interpretation, and the software vendors, they like that. They like the place for interpretation, because then they can make their specific products. They can do everything that you can take the metadata out of a software product and move to the next product. And they like that, of course. Now, I don't know who of you knows SciDoc CRM. Some of you. Now you, a lot of you, most of you probably. Now, we just could have said, well, if ISG doesn't really fit, or if the standards do not really fit, why don't we go into a larger community? Why don't we just adopt SciDoc CRM for the archival world? And there are people, there are archives who have done that. The National Archive of Portugal and has tried to do that, or is currently doing that. There's quite a large archival community in Portugal who is adopting SciDoc CRM. It's a very interesting use case. But the International Council on Archive decided not to take CRM. I will come up with the arguments. And then again, you see 1 month later, after we published Records in Context 0.1, on the mailing list of SciDoc CRM, they started to attack the archivists. Now, the first post was, the archivists are still a different sect. Well, they considered SciDoc CRM as the official religion, and the archivists as a splinter group in some way. And in a later post, one of the guys who's really pushing SciDoc, the RICO guys, are pulling the archivists in the 21st century. Thank you for the compliment, but then fine. But why invent a new warm wheel? Is it not more rational to join the CRM club? How come that the libraries, for instance, managed to overcome the not invented here complex? So he refers to the libraries, which are not really adopting SciDoc CRM. That's an invention of him. But why don't the archives come to us? Good question. So that was a bit a joke. We as archivists are a sect, and people even wanted to print shirts. We're a sect as archivists. And now the arguments, why not just reusing existing standards? There are conceptual models in the libraries like Ferber, Google the abbreviation, for museums, the SciDoc CRM standard, and archives, these existing standards. And these conceptual models are vastly different. Semantic concepts for very basic things like the title, or even the concept for authorship, provenance, they greatly differ between these communities. Remember that the archives, they are made, or they come from a tradition where you have records keeping systems within administration, and you try to document what an administration has done over time. It's a completely different goal what archives do compared to a museum, for example, where you have artworks and you want to document the context of an artwork and the production context of an artwork. And in libraries, you also have works and intellectual works in different shapes and forms and so on. But you never have this problem with describing provenances, for example. Well, you have the problems with describing provenances, of course, in museums and libraries, but you have different problems. And it would be dangerous to repurpose classes or properties of existing ontologies, of existing domain ontologies, and to implement the conceptual model of an archival domain with reusing existing ontologies. I've tried to do that for 2 years with a colleague from the canton of Wallis, and it really becomes a mess. And it's easier to start at zero, develop your own ontology, your own domain ontology for archives, and then link to other ontologies. Archival description, contextualization work through hierarchies. I talked about that. In German, we talk about the tectonics as in geological strata. You go down. None of the existing ontologies can model this specialty with the necessary care. You can't really model hierarchies within SciDoc you probably could model some hierarchies in SciDoc, but not in the level of details that we need in archives. There are other ontologies, well-known ontologies like Prof or DC. They are not capable to do so, and RDA, the ontology from the library world, is only capable in the very limited and I called it workaroundish. I don't even know if that's a word, workaroundish way. And then there's another problem. If you want to maintain the ontology, you don't only produce an ontology once, but it has to be maintained over time. There are new features that you want to add. You see you have made mistakes and so on. You want to re-release your ontology. If you take an existing ontology and you repurpose it for your use, for your domain, you're completely dependent on the body, on the standardization body of this other ontology. You can't advance in your own pace, and that was a political argument. You see, it's not only technical arguments, there are also political arguments. That was a political argument for the International Council on Archive, that we as a community must be able to act and innovate in our own speed. You can say that's a good thing, that's a bad thing. It was just a political decision. And then, of course, it makes sense to define crosswalks and mapping to other standards, to other ontologies, to other communities. We don't want to build an archival silo, for sure not. We want to be interoperable with other communities, with the standard vocabularies from libraries, for example. I heard yesterday that museums don't have standardized vocabularies. We have neither in archives, but the library community is very strong with controlled vocabularies, and we as archives would like to reuse these existing vocabularies. Now, records in context. Records in context is developed by an organization called Expert Group on Archival Description. We're about 14 people who work on this standard. I'm only member of EGAT for 2 years now. The work has started in 2012. So imagine we're in year 9 now. How much discussion and restart and so on has taken place over the years. The RIC standard, Records in Context standard, consists of 3 parts: a conceptual model, an ontology, and in the future, as soon as we have the CM and the ontology in version 1.0, we'll start writing implementation guidelines for software vendors. RIC will replace the existing standard, so we really have we really want to push RIC into every archive in the world. RIC is for descriptive metadata only. That's a very important thing. You need technical metadata, administrative metadata for digital long-term archives, and there are standards like Premis, like EBUCOR. The thing we do in EGAT is to say where does the descriptive metadata end and where does the technical metadata start. To use that, but that will be part of the implementation guidelines. And then as you probably can imagine, we're based on semantic technologies, and yeah, I will show you I will show you later a bit more about that. One of the main aims is that we leave this mono-hierarchical model of ISOG, where you have exactly one focus point, where you have exactly one way to drill down to the item, to make it possible to have more focal points, to have around records, to describe events that took place in the past, to explain biographies of persons, different contexts, and so on and so forth. That means we change from this typical model, which you can encode, for example, in XML very easily, and we go to a graph model, to a network model, which from the beginning on looks very chaotic, and everything can be linked with everything else. And but there we have the possibility to do this interoperability, not only within archive, that's important, but also with the surrounding, with other institutions, with other resources that exist on the internet. Now that's the main entities, the main in semantic technologies you would talk about classes, but here is still in the conceptual model. I talk about entities. We have something called record resource. That's the content of the archive. We have so-called instantiations. I come to that later. You have a record, that's an intellectual concept, and then you have the materialization of the record. That can be a physical object, like a negative of this picture from Nefflen, or it can be a scan, like a TIFF or something. It can be something you can touch. It can be data. So this differentiation between records and instantiations, that's something new that we did in records and context. Then you have the agents, you have events, you have rules. The rules is something that again is important in public archives. You always have to say who had what legal mandate to do what. That's really important to make archives transparent. And you have dates. Dates are quite difficult to model in archive because you have different calendars. You have a lot of about dates. It was about in the 15th century, maybe later or something. And you have places. Somebody asked about places. Places are also quite difficult to model in archives because coordinate systems, they were invented quite late and they change. Geographical names, they don't stay at the same place all the time. There are, for instance, wandering people in Ghana. They're not nomadic, but they move very slowly over the years, and they take the geographical terms with them. So the geographical terms, they are time dependent in certain cultures or certain places. And because we want to really build an ontology that can be used in every cultural context, you have to consider all these special cases, and you can be sure that you never ever treat 100% of the possible cases. And that's why it's so important that the ontology can be versionized, and you can take in new things that you learn. That's how it looks in a bit better diagram. On the left, you have the content, the record resources. That's what was as a G. On the right, you have the agents. Then you have the activities, the events that are the linking pin in a way between the agent and the record resource. And you have these rules, this mandate, who has acted on what legal base. just to show you in a public archive, you would that's a contract between the canton or the canton of Wallis and Savoy. That's how it looks today in a normal archive. You have this hierarchy, and just to show to archivists that they don't have to be afraid of this new standard, you can perfectly model a existing hierarchy in records in context as well. Now, what means records? There are different concepts of records that exist in different archival traditions and legal systems. A record is basically a registered record. What is a registered record? It's kept in a records keeping system. It's kept in an administration. It's not only floating around, and you have no idea about the integrity of the document, who has done what to. You can assume that it's an authentic document that hasn't been altered by whoever. It can be tangible physical archival material, or it can be data. And multi-level records are possible. A website can be a record. And if you archive a website and you have an ARC container, for example, you have a lot of different files in it, a lot of hierarchies and so on. But this one archived website can be one record. That's not so interesting. The interesting part starts now. The context. What is concept? What is context? I will leave you to read that. I will go into a better explanation. What is context? You always need a focal point, a focal event, a certain behavior, an organism, and you want to explain more about this event, for example. You want to understand this event better, and to do that, you need to explain the field of action where this event took place, or you need to explain the environment in time and space, the cultural context, and so on. And the interesting thing, there's always a boundary between this focal event and the context. Boundaries are always interesting in social sciences. So where do you draw the boundaries, and how do you draw? And how do you draw them? That's this photographer, Werner Nefflen, when he was 24 years old. He took a selfie in front of a mirror. He looked down into his Rolleiflex camera, as we do with our mobile phones. He had the same neck problems until some years later he bought a Leica camera, and then he could stand up straight again. And now, if we want to explain the concept of a photographer, what is a photographer? Where do we start? Where does the photographer start? Is it the mental system of him bounded at the camera and the handle of the flash? Is he a cyborg? Is in the sense of a fusion between a human being and a machine? Can you only understand a photographer as a combination, as a fusion, a combination between a human being and a machine? Or are there clear boundaries between him and the cameras? The camera, for example, the knob of the camera is part of the camera, the hand is part of the photographer or of the human being. If you take away the camera, is it still a photographer? And so on and so forth. And we could discuss about every of these questions, and all of you have a lot of opinions about how to answer these questions. And now this doesn't lead us any further if we want to describe pictures. So we have to go back and ask, what do we want to explain? Now, if we want to explain the behavior of taking pictures for a living, we need certain things. We need certain things in the context. We need information about this man, his talents, his education. We need information about the camera he uses, the flash, the light, the dark room he installed in his home. the customers. He needs customers. He needs to pay his rent. That means you need a business model. That's Werner Nefflen about 70 years later, on the day of his 90th birthday in 2009. Some things has changed. He looks completely different, and he hasn't a camera anymore. Well, when he was 80 years old, he decided to retire because his eyes got bad. And what he did too, already when he was young, he worked a lot in the garden, and now he became a hobby gardener. We have the same person, the same name, and now we want to describe a different behavior. We want to explain his behavior during his retirement. He's a hobby gardener. And the context that I used before to explain the behavior as a photographer doesn't play a role anymore. There's no camera anymore. Now we need a different context. And that's why it's called records in contexts and not records in context. We didn't need a second context. We need to understand this concept of retirement. He had enough money to retire. We need a shovel, we need the rake, we need the earth, the water, the sun, the seeds, the plants, and so on, to explain his behavior as a hobby gardener. Now, what are the contexts? What are possible contexts of these pictures so that we can understand this picture much better, and say at the end, well, it's not only a nice vacation picture, but there is much more to know around it. First, there's an information value. Well, we have this in blue, this photo of this this haystack, or this farmer who cuts the grass. We have two persons, Werner Nefflen, the photographer, who is the creator of this photo, and we have another, the farmer XYZ, whose name we just do not know. He is the main subject of this picture. We have a location. The only information we have about the location, that was a note from Werner Nefflen that the photo was taken above the Urnersee. We don't have more geographical information. With the mountains behind, you could quite exactly locate the place where the picture was taken, but that's a normal geographical information that you have in archive, not very seldom real coordinates. That's a typical information. We have a date, and now we have a bit broader concept. I told you wild haymaking in steep meadows. That's a very common thing, and because we lose a bit this tradition, what do? You inscribe it in the UNESCO Immaterial Cultural Heritage. It's an official cultural heritage in Immaterial Cultural Heritage in Switzerland. And to describe these concepts, I didn't have to use records in context, because with SCORS there is already an ontology that is very good at describing controlled vocabularies, and which are in a hierarchy. So I used this other ontology, and that's one thing that we don't have to redo in records in context. This information value is one part. Then we have the whole story of the photo, the context of creation. That's a so-called event. That's something that is really fancy at the moment. So-called event-driven or event-based data models. You can do that. You can describe events with records in context. Well, you have the person. The person decides to go on vacation. He's planning the trip, the family trip. They take the train to the mountains. They check in at the hotel. They take a hike. And at the end, he presses the button the camera, and the result is this photo. And that's a very good and convenient thing to describe how records or how material gets produced. And that's a very important information that we later on have to understand certain events that took place within an administration, within a public administration. How was the decision-making process? What was the decision-making process that led to certain things? And that's over the long time. One of the aims of archives is to make administrative work more transparent, and to record all these events is a really important task. If you do that in the archives, it's normally too late. You have to do that in the document management systems of the administration, and then really take this metadata to the archive. A lot of people who work in administrations, they don't really like that. They would just work and do something and not be really transparent. But the archives really push the administrations into this direction. Now we have the materialization. We have this photo, but we have different instances of this picture. We have the 6x6 negative that came out of this Rolleiflex camera. We have a contact copy that he made by himself, just a 6x6 centimeter picture. We then digitized it. We have a TIFF archival copy, and from that we have this JPEG preview, which is on the web. And you can describe now this materialization. We have the so-called derived instantiations from the negative. We have migrated instantiation. So from the TIFF to the JPEG, we do a file format migration. You can model all that with records in context. That's something new, and that's mainly for the digital archives. That's a really important issue to keep things traceable and to describe what instantiation is connected to another instantiation. Yesterday, in yesterday's talk, we heard about this the silver work. What is the original? What is the copy? And in the future, we will have a lot of discussions in archives. Is a copy of something a new record, or is it just a new instantiation? There we have to get used to this discussion, and that will probably part of this implementation guidelines, things like that. You can model the whole archival processing context to create sort of a meta archive to show how did the archivists treat the material that they got. And archivists like to do that because archivists throw away a lot of material. That's a secret. Or not even a secret. It's just a fact that you get a lot of material from an administration and you cannot archive everything. So you make decisions. There's a selection process in archives, and you throw away a lot of material. And there are times where people come back after 30 years. Well, why did you throw away that and that? Now, all of a sudden, we have new, as historians, new questions. And why could you be so stupid to throw away all this material? And it's very important that for archivists, and archivists really want to do that, to document their decision-making process and to say, on the information that we have today, we take that and that decision, and we throw away all the old HR material, for example. And if one of our students gets a Nobel Prize somewhere in the future, we're sorry we threw away his first application letter for the, even if now it would be really important, but we can show that at this point in time, we took the decision, the deliberate decision to throw away this material. It didn't just disappear somehow. because it was in a damp cellar or something. The material was destroyed, but it was destroyed through a well-documented process. And this is something really important, a really important function that that records in context can fulfill. Now, the legal context. Legal context of material is always complicated to model and to describe. And the legal context of Werner Nefflen's work is that during his professional activity, of course, he as a photographer, he owned the rights of his work and he could resell it. After his retirement, he donated his work, about 20,000 images, to the city of Baden, to the city museum, and the contract stated that he was compensated for the commercial use of the images until the end of his life, because it was part of his rent. And when he died in 2014, the contract stated that the income from the rights of use will go to the city of Baden. And for some years, writing invoices for the rights of use, it was such a mess to get a little bit of money for the rights of use, and the city of Baden decided it's much more convenient for the city, much more effective. It's cost effective to put all these 20,000 pictures under a Creative Commons license. Everybody can use it. We put everything that has been digitized online. The local newspaper, they just grab the JPEG images and print them. They don't have to ask. And for the archive, in fact, it was a good move to put everything on the Creative Commons. All the hassle with negotiating with people, is it commercial work? Is it just for a student who wants to put it, who wants to use this image in a work that he does at university? Then it's free, and why is it free and not free, and so on. Put on the Creative Commons, and everything was solved. You can now you can model that with well, I say that from an archivist point of view, of course. I don't say it as a photographer who lives from that. You can model this is important, and it's a problem if it's not really properly documented. You will not be able to use the material for a long time if you really have good documentation about the legal concept, the legal context. Now we have the public users. That's an agent. The public user can have public access to these pictures via a rule that is expressed in a contract. So you can model the whole network of the legal negotiations, and where is written what and on what rule, which agent can access the material based on what rule. And the rules, of course, they are time-based. Copyrights, they expire at the moment of time, and you have to be able to model that. Now I come to the conclusions. Records in context is a further development of existing standards. It's not a complete paradigm shift in archival theory or in archival description or in archival practical work. That's very important to say. With RIC, it becomes possible to model the respect of funds principle. That's a French concept to not interfere with the original structure of a body of work or a body of archival material that you get. Not making a complete chaos of what you get, but the structure of how you get archival material is an information in itself, and you want to preserve this original structure. Existing archival metadata can be transferred to records in context as it is. I showed that with this example from the State Archive of Wallis. That's a very important message for archives, because creating descriptive metadata is a very tedious and very expensive task. It takes a lot of time to describe archival material, and these descriptive metadata, they are a huge asset for the archive. And if they lose their metadata, that would be a complete catastrophe. Records in context can be implemented to a limited extent already with existing archival information systems, but there will be a new generation of tools. They do not exist yet. The Swiss National Archive, they run a tender at the moment for a new archival information system. I have no idea who will get this contract, but I can bet that it's not one of the existing vendors for archival information systems. They're not really interested in records in context because they would have to change their software, and they just want to sell the licenses. It's probably one of there are 2 or 3 open source players, and I can imagine that it will be one of the open source players who will get this new contract. But we'll see in the future. Of course, we need software vendors who adopt the standard to really, and especially we need software vendors who create products for small archives who don't have the large finances as national archives do, to really go broad into all the archives with this new standard. I put some resource. I hope you will somehow get the PDF. I think the slides. I put all the links in there. And you can download the ontology on GitHub, and there's a master branch which is the official release at the moment. And then there are always branches where we work. So we are 2 people working on the ontology, Florence Claveau from the French National Archive and me. And we do all the work in public. So every little change that we do on the ontology, we do on the branch on the GitHub repository. And if there are things you think are false or should be changed, you can write issues in the GitHub repository, and then we can track our answers and our work. Okay, thank you for the attention, and I'm open to questions.